want to welcome everyone to Cyberweek 2022. The National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution has been hosting these free online dispute resolution and technology conferences every year for the last 21 years, and we're excited to do that this year as well. My name is Leah Wing, and I'm the director of the center, and I want to acknowledge our founder, who will be presenting this afternoon, Ethan Katz. He's not only the founder of the center, but founder of the field of online dispute resolution, and you'll hear more from him later today. I want to give a very warm welcome to everyone to what we hope will be a very exciting and a very full week of presentations from all over the world. Thank you to our colleagues who are going to share their expertise and join each other's sessions and engage in a robust conversation about all the changes that are going on in the dispute resolution field as we add technology to the mix. And we're highlighting this week ODR beyond monetary disputes. So we have a series with an event every single day. As I mentioned, Ethan will be talking this afternoon on ODR and healthcare. And we have an exciting, important panel talking about ODR and immigration and refugee cases in Canada tomorrow. And then important discussion about EU Digital Privacy Act and ODR on Wednesday. And our keynote speaker today, Dan, and his colleagues will be talking on Thursday about ODR and relationship repair, arbitration of labor grievances. And on Friday, our colleague Colin, who's also on the call now, and his colleague Stacy will be discussing tech and multi-party dispute resolution post-COVID, because circumstances have certainly changed. But this is only just a taste. The fact that you made it into this session means you've had a chance to look at the rich program, but I want to encourage you to see that we've got a negotiation simulation you can participate in this week. We've got tech demos later today. We've got a social hour this evening and on Friday, or wherever you are in the world at some point during your day. And we also have a Spanish track and a Portuguese language track. So there's a lot going on, and we hope that you can dip in and out during your very busy week. Before I hand it over to our keynote, I do want to take a moment to share a little bit about his bio. I think we're incredibly fortunate not only to have him launching this week, but he's going to be talking about a very timely and important book that he has published. It came out in September. So let me do a small introduction to our friend and colleague, Dan Rainey. He's the principal in Holistic Solutions Incorporated. He's an adjunct faculty member in graduate dispute resolution programs and law schools, and he co-taught the very first ODR course. He's a fellow of the National Center, and he's a founding and present board member of the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution. While Dan and I have collaborated many times over the years, we've most recently collaborated in the last year, drafting the new National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution and International Council for Online Dispute Resolution ODR standards that were published this past April. He's also served with the International Mediation Institute, the Supreme Court of Virginia's Access to Justice Commission, and the Uniform Law Commission's Study Committee on the Singapore Convention on Mediation. He's one of the editors-in-chief of the International Journal of Online Dispute Resolution and of the award-winning book that was published last year in its second edition, Online Dispute Resolution Theory and Practice. And he has published numerous publications over the past 20 years on ADR and ODR. He previously served as chief of staff for the US government's federal agency for mediation called the National Mediation Board. And in that capacity, he partnered with the center and with the University of Massachusetts Amherst on early ODR experiments. He's been involved with ODR since early on, and those experiments were funded by the National Science Foundation. And recently, he's a recipient of the Mary Parker Follett Award for Innovation in Dispute Resolution. And I think I saved that award for last because I think to talk about Dan and innovation, they go hand in hand. The book that he's going to speak to you about today, Integrating Technology into Your Dispute Resolution Practice, Making Friends with the Fourth Party, is really a major contribution to the field. We all know that over the last 20 years, people have been experimenting with technology, helping to form the field of ODR, and it's been slowly growing. But the pandemic has really exploded who has been using tech in their courts and in their ADR practices. But the application has certainly outpaced relevant training and detailed practical guidance. And Dan has made a contribution by filling that gap. This book is what I would say a comprehensive and practical guide about what steps mediators, arbitrators, and other dispute interveners, in fact, negotiators and disputants would benefit from reading the book, because it helps raise important questions about risks, but also gives guidance about how to reduce them, and ways in which the practitioners can harness technology rather than be led by them. And the last thing I'd say about this is, as far as I know, this is really a unique contribution in dispute resolution handbooks, because it discusses the complex relationship between communication, the mind-body connection, and the use of technology altogether. So with that, I want to turn it over to Dan, who plans to, as he said to me before we began, not really do a keynote presentation, but a keynote conversation. So while he's going to go ahead and begin, he does welcome questions as he goes. So thank you all for being here, and I turn it over to Dan.
Thank you very much, Leah. That just goes to show that if you stay around long enough, there are some things you can say about anybody. That was a marvelous introduction. Thank you very much. A humbling introduction. Thank you. And as Leah said, I want to do this not so much as a keynote speech, as a keynote conversation. I thrive on tangents and questions. And so if you have something that you want to talk about that I'm either not talking about enough, or you want to go off in a different direction, or you have a question, by all means, put it in the chat. Leah will be monitoring those, and she'll break in and guide us along as we go through. So I want to talk today. The reason I was invited to do this today is the book itself, but the fact that I wrote the book is emblematic of something that is dear to my heart. And that is, everybody knows that online dispute resolution has its origins in e-commerce. Back in the mid-1990s, with Colin and Ethan and others, began to look at the kind of disputes that are being created in cyberspace in the e-commerce world, and realizing that those are in some ways unique disputes, and disputes that weren't going to get resolved unless there was a way to do it using online technology. And so the money was there, the need was there, the cases were there, and development began and was very aggressive in the e-commerce world. What we're seeing these days is that much of the technology itself, but also much of the experience that was developed in e-commerce, is being used to integrate technology into the court systems. And all along, from the very beginning, from the mid-1990s on, while all of that was going on, while all of that development in e-commerce and the courts was going on, there have been practitioners like me who were doing what I would call more traditional ADR practice and integrating technology into that ADR practice. I've sometimes referred to it as the difference between wholesale and retail dispute resolution. Early on, Colin used to quote the number of cases that eBay would handle per year at 60 million cases per year. It's a lot more than that now, I'm sure, but that's wholesale dispute resolution. I mean, that's a tsunami of cases that it's impossible to handle in traditional ways. But I've been involved mostly in retail dispute resolution. That is a fewer number of cases, a little bit more messy, so they don't exist in so much of a bounded universe, where they're handled in ways that are at least analogous to the ways we handled cases before we even had some of the technology that we use now. And so what I tried to do with the book, which, let me put up the cover, what I tried to do with the book was to take the mistakes that I've made over the last 25 years and the things that I got right over the last 25 years, and try to distill them down into some practical guidelines for how to integrate technology into that ADR practice. And all along, from the very beginning, from the mid-1990s on, while all of that was going on, there have been practitioners like me who were doing what I would call more traditional ADR practice and integrating technology into the court systems. And all along, from the very beginning, from the mid-1990s on, while all of that was going on, there have been practitioners like me who were doing what I would call more traditional ADR practice and integrating technology into that ADR practice. And so what we're seeing these days is that much of the technology that was developed in e-commerce, that was developed in e-commerce, but also much of the experience that was developed in e-commerce is being used to integrate technology into the court systems. And all along, from the very beginning, from the mid-1990s on, while all of that was going on, there have been practitioners like me who were doing what I would call more traditional ADR practice and integrating technology into that ADR practice. And so what we're seeing these days is for how to do online dispute resolution in a retail environment as a traditional ADR practitioner. One of my colleagues, who I think may be on this call, said during the pandemic that the pandemic was the big bang of ODR for practitioners, and we all learned how to use technology very quickly, and the challenge is to learn how to use it well. And that's really what I was trying to talk about in the book, is how do we take our experiences that we've gotten over the last few years, trying to integrate technology into more traditional practice, and how do we develop best practices out of that. So that's where I started, and that's where I was headed. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the opening 3 chapters of the book, where I try as best I can to lay a foundation for why I suggest doing the things that I suggest doing later in the practical how-to aspects of the book. And so I'm going to talk about communication, I'm going to talk a little bit about culture, and I'll talk a bit about ethics and standards, because these are things that are at the root of, I think, suggesting how we should be going about both integrating the technology into our work, but also actually doing the work with the technology. Communicate at its base, dispute resolution, whether you're using technology or not, is a communicative enterprise. And one of the things that I've always found remarkable is that as early as the late 1940s, after World War II, and the early 1950s, people like Claude Shannon were talking about the mathematic theory of communication, which was his language. And one of the key elements of that work that he was doing back then was to say that the channel that you use to do your communication matters. Later on, the idea was popularized a lot by Marshall McLuhan with his medium as the message, but it actually goes back to the very beginning of the communication work that was done after World War II, and which is the basis really of digital communication. And what we look at when we look at the technology that we're integrating into our practice is we're integrating communication channels, and those communication channels make a difference in and of themselves. And what I try to do in the way that I think about it is break it down into 3 elements of that communication channel, whether it's text, audio, or video. There's a verbal element, that is, what do we say? What are the words that we use to talk to one another? And those things probably get changed the least by the use of technology. Here, as we're talking today, the words that I'm using are pretty much the same words that I would be using if we were sitting around the table talking to one another. There are enough problems with that without integrating technology into it. We all operate with a series of perceptual filters that allow us to think about what is appropriate for us to say, but also how we will interpret those things that are said to us. So the things that get said, the very same words may have very different meanings to different people in different contexts. But in an environment that we're mostly operating in now, which is an oral or visual environment, the verbal element remains relatively the same. But the technology gives you a chance to use another element of the initial communication model that came out of the early work, and that is the feedback loop. One of the things that is absolutely fundamental to good communication theory is that we very rarely get it right the first time. That if we want to understand what the other party is really saying and understand it on their terms, there's probably going to be a series of message interpretation, and message interpretation before we get there. What I have found in the work that I've done with technology is that the ability for me to have multiple channels open, the ability for me to work with parties individually before we bring them together, a number of things that I can do using technology that help me make sure that the words that are getting used are being understood in a way that is consistent with the meaning that it was intended. And as you work in face-to-face environments across the table from one another, you can know very quickly that the words that get said can be misunderstood very easily. And so one of the things that you can do with technology that I talk about in the book is there are ways that you can unload the verbal content, sometimes much easier than you can if you're operating in a face-to-face environment. The nonverbal element obviously is one that gets greatly affected by the technology that we use. If I did away with the slides, you would see my full face, and you would probably actually get better nonverbal information off my facial nonverbal than we would if we were sitting in a conference room together. However, since I've got the slides up, you probably have me in a little postage stamp sized video, and so you're probably not getting all that great nonverbal facial information. And of course, what we do is we cut off all of the other nonverbal elements that are in the room. And so there are things in all of these channels that we use, all of the elements of the channels of communication. There are things that we can exploit to our benefit, and there are things that we can that we must overcome. I think personally, the largest impact on the actual ability to communicate in a technology environment is the environment itself. That when I invite you into a conference room and we sit down across the table from one another, that's not an unfamiliar environment for you. I don't have to teach you how to enter that room, and I don't have to teach you how to talk in that room. There may be lots of problems that go on, but the fundamentals are there. You understand what it is. You walk into the room, you know you're going to sit across the table from the person that you're dealing with. It's an environment that you can slip into. What I have to do when I'm operating in a technology environment is I have to actually structure that environment. I have to create that environment. And one way or another, I have to invite people in a way that they understand what the effect of that environment is. And so I get to make all kinds of choices that I can't make if I'm operating face-to-face. I can decide that we're going to do very easily shuttle diplomacy so that you're never going to see each other face-to-face. I can decide that we're going to do a gatekeeping system as opposed to a moderated system. There are all sorts of things that I can do that make me more flexible as a third party so that I can create that environment in a way that is most effective. So the first thing I think about when I think about working with any parties is okay, we're going to be communicating with one another. How do I manage the verbal, the nonverbal, and the environmental elements in a way that leads us toward the ability to actually talk to one another and understand one another? Because for me, in the way I approach third-party work, I would not suggest evaluating the effectiveness of dispute resolution by outcome, by whether or not I got a decision or whether or not I got an agreement. If two parties walk away from the table actually understanding the other party's point of view, whether they agree with it or not, I think that's a success. And that really depends, in my book anyway, on managing these elements of the communication process. So that's the first part. That's how I open the book, and that's really at the base of a lot of the advice that I give later on. The second thing I talked about is culture. And there are lots of academic definitions for culture, but the one that I like the most, and the one I think fits best with the kind of work we do with technology, is that culture really is the way we do things around here. And so when I invite you in to the space that I've created, I want to make sure that you understand how we're going to do what we're going to do, and that you are in agreement with and understand that process. Pardon me. Depending on which research you read, some of the researchers suggest that there are as many as 50 different identifiable ways to do mediation around the world. And you can quibble a bit with the way they break it down and whether there really are 50, but it's pretty unarguable that there are many ways that mediation happens around the world. One of the things that you get to do with technology, and one of the things that I talk about in the how-to section of the book, is that you have an opportunity to do preparation for the parties in a way that is more robust than you often have the opportunity to do with face-to-face work. And as for instance, there's next week I'm involved in a 3-day need-arb process. Well, the precursor to that was a 1-hour session that we had with the parties last week, where we simply said, this is the way we're going to conduct the sessions. Are you okay with that? Let's do everything we need to do when we're actually working with your issue without talking about your issue. Let's just go through. If we're going to have to share documents, this is how we do it. I want you to do it and make sure everything's working okay. So we have a chance to not just test the equipment. We also have a chance to test the environment and to make sure that the way we're going to do the work we're going to do is A, understood by the parties, and B, is accessible to the parties. So again, I talk about the cultural element quite a lot, and some of the things that are endemic to the culture actually are part of the how-to that I get to toward the end of the book. Finally, I talk about standards, and these are standards that Leah and I were very active in helping to develop, although they come from all of the members of the center and the iCoder. And so accessibility, accountability, competence, confidentiality, equality, fairness, impartiality, legality, security, and transparency. All these are standards that no matter whether you're working with technology or not, you really want to be cognizant of. Pardon me. The one that I think stands out for me is very important for technology use, and the one that I talk about a lot in the book is preparation of the parties. For me, it is an ethical imperative that when I invite the parties into this room that I've created, this virtual space that I've created, that they really understand what they're getting into, that they're able to operate there in a way that is not going to disadvantage them, that the process and the technology is transparent, and that when they come in, when they say, yes, I will join you, they know what they're saying yes to. To me, that is the baseline that I have to start from. And what I do in the book is I talk about 3 steps of preparing all of that and getting people ready to come into the space that you've created. First, preparing the space itself. There are beginning to be many more what I would call bespoke systems. That is, mediation systems and ODR systems that will allow you to go in the front door, remain in that platform all the way through from the intake all the way through to signing the agreement at the very end. What most of us probably still, to some degree, use what I would call a mosaic approach. That is, we look at the functions that we have to fulfill with the parties, and we choose technology that helps us fulfill those functions. And again, for most of us who do this work a lot, we're not just choosing a platform, we're choosing multiple platforms depending upon what the level of security is for the platform and how that fits in with the parties that we're dealing with. There's other, obviously, elements that we use to make the choice. But the first thing I want to do is I want to prepare the space. I want to understand the technology that I'm going to bring in and how it fulfills the functions that I need it to fulfill. The second thing is I got to prepare myself, because every minute that I have to think about the technology while I'm working with the parties is a minute that I can't think about the party's problem. And so from my point of view, the best way to do that is to impose yourself on family and friends and say, okay, if I'm going to use this platform, I'm going to try it out with people who don't really have a problem, but are just using the technology so that I know which buttons to push to get things to happen. And once you've prepared the space in yourself, then preparing the parties, getting the parties together and making sure that everything operates in a way that's accessible to them. And there's a psychological aspect of that for me as well. And that is, if I can get you together in a test session and I can get you to do all the things that we need to do, we're probably going to have some glitches in trying to get everybody on the same page with the technology. And what that does for me as a third party is that when we get together for the actual session and they're going to talk about their issue, they have already together solved a problem. They've already gotten themselves to the point where they've solved any problems that we had about the technology without confronting their own issues. And so it's a different psychological space to start in. And I think that for technology, for me, that's something that works very well. Let me stop sharing. Now, are there any questions or anything in the chat, Leah, that I need to deal with?
Nothing's in the chat. I'm sure there are questions and thoughts in people's minds.
Yeah, well,
in the chat.
One last thing that I wanted to talk about and sort of leave you with. One of the things that I think is almost unarguable is that the use of artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence and decision trees, et cetera, such as have been used in e-commerce and in the courts, are making their way into the technology that is used in private practice. And again, I think it's unarguable that they're going to be increasingly available to third parties to use. And that's a blessing and a curse. And the blessing is that if the AI is working well, it does really good things. It gives you information that is very difficult to get if you don't have it. On the other hand, it can be a curse. And I think the curse really is that many practitioners don't understand it. Justice Alito, who probably ought to know better, when talking about the technology, the AI technology that is used to draw voting district boundaries, made the comment that artificial intelligence and computers have no intent, so it can't be biased. To borrow a phrase from my colleagues in the hard sciences, that doesn't even rise to the level of being wrong. That is completely just out of this world wrong. As we've seen over and over again in the AI that is being used for sentencing and for other things in the court system. If you combine that with the fact that as a dispute resolution community, as people who are involved in dispute resolution in various organizations, we're a fractured community. We've never talked to each other very well. There are tons of organizations around the world that deal with dispute resolution, and it is very rare for there to be conversations across those borders. Sometimes it happens, but not that often, really. And one of the things that means to me is that as people develop artificial intelligence programs and augmented intelligence programs that are going to work with dispute resolution, unless we change the way we're doing business among ourselves, we're not going to have a large voice in how that technology is developed. That there are some things that we can do that I think are critical for us to guide the development of that technology that we're all going to be using in the future as we go forward. One thing we can do very simply is to make sure that standards of practice and ethical guidelines, like the ones that we talked about earlier, and like the ones Leah and I will talk about later this week, are adopted by as many organizations as possible, so that there's at least some standardization of how we think about what's right and what's appropriate in the field. The other thing that I would suggest that we've never done before is that it's about time that the dispute resolution community put together a summit to talk about where we're going with artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence, and the other technology that's being developed. Because if we don't do something like that, we're not going to have a voice. We're going to receive from the people who develop the systems, the technology, and we can choose to use it or not. And right now, transparency, for example, isn't a huge issue with the people who develop the AI technology, except that they don't want to be transparent. In fact, there are court cases that determine that it's proprietary information and you can't be transparent. But if we could, as a community, say, these are the things we expect out of the technology that you're creating to meet the standards of practice that we think are essential, or we're not going to use it. If we can get even close to that point, then we begin to have an impact on how the technology is developed. And I think that is just a good thing going forward. So as I said, I wasn't going to talk forever because I know nobody wants to listen to very long speeches online. So those are my thoughts this morning, and I'm happy to respond to any questions or comments that anyone might have. Or we can all get a cup of coffee.
So I have a comment and a question then, Dan. For one thing, I'm thrilled about this. I think this is something that several of us have been talking about for a couple of years, and I'm glad that we have your megaphone to encourage next steps. I think the center would be happy to take the lead on this, and I encourage everyone on the call to be thinking about that as well, so we can continue the conversation about something like a summit. My question is, I'm wondering your thoughts, because you come from the framework around the use of technology being both a place and a set of tools to assist with communication. I'm wondering your thoughts regarding self-censorship. So I was thinking about when people meet without technology face-to-face, that for some of them, it becomes more comfortable to be open about whatever they want to say. And for others, there is self-censoring because of that. And so I'm wondering, when you add technology, what's your view about how that impacts when and how people self-censor or choose not to?
Well, that's a great question. I guess I don't so much, I haven't, I'll go back up and start again. I haven't so much thought about it as an issue of self-censorship as I've thought about it as a question of comfort and trust. The way I approach the work, the private practice work that I've done is, if it's at all possible, I want to talk to the parties individually before we get together. And what I want to talk about with them is not so much the issue that they have, but how can we frame the process in a way that brings them into that process with a level of comfort and a level of trust that allows them to say what they need to say in a way that's comfortable for them. And it's I think easier for me to do that if I can say, okay, we're going to get together for a half an hour, let's talk about this. And so I can say, well, here's my theory about how we're going to approach this. This is the way I operate. This is what I expect. This is what I'm not going to do. Is that okay with you? Are you comfortable with that? Is there anything that I can do that's going to make this process something that you are comfortable coming into and that you feel that you can be heard in? And so I don't really think about it so much as self-censorship as creating an environment where they feel that they have found a way to say the things they want to say and the things that they need to say. And I find that the pre-session work that I do is really key to that. And so if I do that well, in my experience, people will be able to talk because they will have thought about how they want to do that. And if there's a barrier there, if it's reasonable, we can figure a way to address that barrier. Other questions or comments?
I have I'm sorry, go ahead, Ellen.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're on mute now. Ellen, you're on mute.
Am I on mute now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. You would think after teaching online for 2 years, I would have some fluency with these tools, but still not. I just wanted to underscore, Dan, how much I agree with the problem related to the, I would call it, with all respect to Ethan, the fifth party, which is the coders. I don't write in the area. I just have a book chapter that I update every 4 years, so I kind of keep up from a student to present student materials. But what I become quite concerned about is the backgrounds or lack of ethical training or lack of history or lack of humanity training for many of the people who are now producing some of the dispute resolution systems that are going to be in the backbone of the new things like Bitcoin disputes and blockchain disputes. And from the reading that I've done, I would say that that's something that has to be watched. So I just really wanted to underscore from your remarks how important I think that is. They're going to have an enormous amount of influence, and lack of transparency is huge in that regard. So just a basic little comment, if you don't.
It's you bring up a really good point, and that is that we're beginning to develop types of disputes that we didn't have before, and the AI is going to be used in those kind of disputes. And the cyber disputes, cryptocurrency, and all the other stuff that's out there. But one of the other things that I think about is that the regular old stuff that we do, divorce mediation, for example, how people divide property in divorce mediation, how people deal with child custody in divorce mediation. There are AI systems that will say, okay, if your two parties look this way, if they fit this mold, then they're probably going to have this kind of outcome because that's what's happened over 1 million cases that we've evaluated over the last 5 years. And that's, in a sense, that's great because it does give you information. And as mediators, we would all have an idea in our head where they're going anyway. We all do that almost naturally. But when you have an AI program that says, okay, I've looked at 1 million cases and this is where you're going to head, that's good information, but it's not good information if it dominates your thinking. But it's also not good information if the things they've chosen to let the platform learn from are in and of themselves skewed. And that's the problem that we have currently with a lot of the technology that's doing things like sentencing guidelines. They're using past data on sentencing and the past data on sentencing is itself biased. And so all they're really doing with the AI is perpetuating the bias that's already there. So it's, and this is a problem that goes back a lot further. When let's say the late 90s, early 2000s, when there were the very beginnings of third-party ODR work, of bringing in the fourth party. It's just where you don't even have artificial intelligence, you just have a platform that walks you through some steps. Well, generally speaking, those steps conform to the North American model of mediation. So, if you go to a place that doesn't use that model, where that doesn't work, this great piece of software becomes really useless. And so I just underline again, I thank you for underscoring it, that if what we need to do is we need to be talking to the folks who are producing the software so that they understand what we think is an ethical and appropriate way to produce that software. Yeah, Jeff.
Well, one of the interesting things that is being mentioned here is that, the coders are, driving some of the decisions that are being made in this next space of the Bitcoin space, the blockchain space, and so forth. Well, to the extent that the coders are actually doing that, the only ones who are the ones who are at the very beginning of the process. Most of these folks are being brought in with a lot of money. There's a tremendous amount of banks that are putting in a lot of money, and the decisions that are being fought right now in that space are about standards of operation. When you actually drill down to some of the things like smart contracts and so forth, the field of any dispute resolution is sort of left to the side. It's shocking to me how little focus is being put on that side of it. If you go back to the beginning when Ethan and Colin were working with the eBay situation, you had a marketplace. You had a lot of people that were using that marketplace, so there was a need to develop a dispute resolution system around that. And the handful of people that were involved in making those decisions had a marketplace to work with. We're far from that in this whole metaverse space. And it's the time for a crowd like this to get into it, in fact, because some of the standards that have been developed could actually be implemented in the space, and so little attention is being put on how the disputes will be resolved, let alone figuring out what the disputes are going to be. And that's the state of play. So this is a good time for that kind of a summit that you're talking about. But the right people need to be invited and participating in it. The coders themselves are working. They're being told what to do. They're being paid money to do it, unless they're part of the founding group, at which point in time, those, how they attract the money and so forth is more of a driver, because they want to become a standard. They're not really focusing as much on the dispute resolution side of it. At least that's been my experience.
Well, it's Colin, I'll get to you in just a second. There's it goes beyond the technology itself. There are assumptions that are made about why we do what we do when you create technology for dispute resolution. And I'll say this, Colin, then I'll open up for you, because you may want to respond to this. At eBay, when you were working there, the term dispute resolution almost became a dirty word. And so you look at the millions of cases that are coming through, and you look at the way you want to resolve those, and you move from a mindset, an ADR mindset, which says, I want to get to the bottom of this and find the best possible solution that everybody can live with, that is the elegant solution for this particular problem. You move from that to making dispute resolution a customer service element. What you want is you want to resolve it fast in a way they think is fair, and leaving them with the notion they want to come back to your marketplace. And that's the dispute resolution model that you wind up with, as opposed to this, gee, I want to drill down and get the best, most creative dispute resolution for this particular problem. It becomes a universe of problems that are similar, and you develop a mindset that moves you into that universe. Is that unfair? You're on mute, Colin.
I was inspired by Ellen, so I thought I would speak on mute a little bit. How much time have I spent on Zoom? And I still do that. I think you're absolutely right, Dan. I think if you leave it to the MBAs and the people that haven't thought about dispute resolution, well, they think about it as cost benefit analysis. All right, well, we have pain in our consumers, and it's harming our loyalty, it's harming our satisfaction. How much money do we need to spend to make it go away? But my contention is this is all too important to leave to anyone other than ourselves. I mean, this is why I think we have to build our own technology. If you leave it to people that don't know anything about dispute resolution, they're going to monkey it up and they're going to mess it up, and they're not going to think about all of the ethical requirements and guidelines that we've come up with over the last couple decades. And I would argue that it's a natural thing that when a new technology emerges, the first people that do it are the people that haven't thought about it very much. They're the people who kind of feel the pain, and then they build something jerry-rigged just to try and make the problem go away. But, when we talk about AI and we highlight all of the problems with AI, I think we have yet to have built an AI from within the ODR community. I think all this AI stuff is happening outside. So please, what were we going to say, Dan?
I was going to say, I just want to underscore, we've yet to build real AI, period.
I mean, I see a lot of it out here in Silicon Valley. I don't know if you guys have seen Stable Diffusion. It's amazing. You can download it and install it on your own computer. I mean, you can go to DALL-E. You can go use these AIs. You can use OpenAI. These technologies are becoming much more widely utilized. But I remember, I think maybe it was Graham who told me, probably around 2006, if he had a dime for every time somebody talked about ODR, as opposed to when they did ODR, he would be a rich guy. He could just retire. And I sort of feel that way about AI. None of it's happening and everybody's talking about it. It is increasingly becoming a real thing. And I don't think it's like the metaverse, which is just, that's a lot of smoke. It's been around for decades, and it's still going to be a couple decades before it turns into whatever Zuckerberg thinks it's going to be. AI is here, and AI is changing our world, and AI is going to grow very quickly. But a lot of the ways we talk about AI is a little retro. I mean, I think that now there are people who are doing research into AIs that show their work. And, all this talk about AIs being black boxes, that's only one way that AI works. You can now build AIs that will go through and they'll say, we think this is the right outcome, and here is why we think that is the right outcome. We have done each step of the process, and we've analyzed it, and we concluded this, and we concluded this, and we concluded this, and this is our confidence interval here, and that's why we got this outcome. And that's very different than, as you say, Dan, like this sentencing guideline platform, which is just a black box. You put the data in, and it gives you a recommendation on the far end. I think there are ways that we can design and utilize AI within the field that are within the guidelines that we've created for ourselves around what ethical dispute resolution looks like, and that are procedurally just. Yeah. But we have to experiment. We have to do it ourselves. I think, we would not trust, Walmart to build a justice system, even though they're the users of the justice system every day. We wouldn't trust, rando technology companies to build healthcare technology. They need to work with the doctors. They need to understand what the rules are, what the guidelines are. Same thing with banking. We would create systems that were too susceptible to ethical pitfalls. So I think that's why we need to build our own technology. We should be building our own ODR platforms. Now, I'm biased in that because I am building ODR platforms, but I am the fifth party. I am the coder. Like people want to work with me because they know that I care about dispute resolution. You can go get some software designer and he'll build whatever you tell him to build, something incredibly unethical, and he won't push back on you. He or she won't push back on you. But I think that we ourselves need to build these tools and refine them, and it's going to take a long time. But eventually the work will come to us because people know that we care about these things. And, we think about the ethical guidelines, and we won't build an unethical ODR platform because if somebody proposes an unethical ODR platform, we'll say, no, we're not going to build that because we subscribe to these guidelines. So I think the fifth party, I like that framing, Ellen. Let's mark the date, Halloween 2022, the fifth party. And now I'm talking about the sixth party. But I think we should be the fifth party. The people on this call, the people that attend Cyberweek, we need to build our own technology. And then this period of outsiders who don't know anything about dispute resolution building these systems. The other thing I would just want to say, and I'll hand it back to Leah and Ellen, I think that, Dan, what you said about building a diagnosis wizard that is under the cultural assumptions of the West, I agree, that is a problem. But now what I see that's so exciting in the ODR field is we have ODR platforms that are being built all around the world, and they all look very different. So we have Ibram in China, and we have Jupitus in India, and we have Morenike putting together Kiluyama in Nigeria, and that's great. That's the way it should work. But all these people should be part of the field. We should welcome them into the field so that we can all have a dialogue about what ethical ODR looks like in each of these cultural contexts. Okay, I'll stop there.
Ellen?
So now I'm unmuted. Yeah, first of all, I don't want this conversation to take away from the actually very important messages in the introduction that Dan gave about how to prepare, how to train, all those things. And I'm going to buy the book, Dan. And I'm going to figure out what I need to increase in my teaching of my students on their communication and stuff in online environments. I just want to say about the development of dispute resolution within some of those new systems. I don't understand the articles that I read, to be honest, but having read some of them, I can see that, for example, in the smart contract world, they are embedding different types of dispute resolution processes that probably would not make you happy. So maybe I'll look for some of those articles that I sort of put to the side because I really only barely understand them, and I'll sort of send them over if they're not on the most recent ODR bibliography. But they are doing things to resolve disputes that have already occurred in the smart contract world, and they struck me as being really odd and problematic. But I don't want to take away from the other message, which I really think is important, all the ways in which we need to rethink how we practice. Because a lot of the people I see doing mediation practice in my community, they're just going on Zoom, putting people in breakout rooms and shuttling back and forth and resolving things in the same old directive, non-facilitative way that they've done court-connected mediation forever. So I think there's a lot to be gained from getting that bigger message out as well.
Yeah, thank you. And just let me respond to Colin a little bit. It's not that I'm not aware that it ain't like it used to be. Things are not as bad as they used to be. There are some differences in the way things were, say, even 5 years ago. My point was that loud voices get heard, and we need to have a loud voice as a field about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Because unfortunately, not everybody who's going to develop technology is going to be you. There are going to be other people who are doing it. There are going to be people who do it for various reasons. And if we don't have a loud voice, it'll be done without cognizance of what we think is important. And so I'm just being a rabble rouser. I just want to make this. Other comments, questions?
Yeah, let me jump in here. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping as well as content here. I want to point us towards a question in the chat by Julia. I'm curious about the ways to get the attention of others who need to, quote, be in the room, unquote, and what incentives do they have to participate? And I was thinking about Julia's question and as Colin was speaking, so I want to jump in the mix and then hand it back to Dan to think out loud with us on that. I really agree that we need to be the ones building this and discussing what needs to be included. I 100% agree. And I also think, as Ellen pointed out, I think a lot of folks who are practitioners, while they're waiting for something to be built or before they find out about it, they're using off-the-shelf technology. So I think that those that are not paying attention to our field or our ethics are still making an impact. So one of the things I will say is the ethical principles for online dispute resolution, which was a precursor to the ODR standards, was designed explicitly thinking about the work by IEEE, which is the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which is the largest engineering membership organization in the world. I think they have 440,000 members or something like that. And by consensus, they reached agreement on a set of ethical standards. And they have a lot.
Something else, honey, I'm happy to do that while I listen to this.
They have a lot in common with us. And so one of the things I want to encourage from my perspective is, while we need to build the technology from within, I think that our conversations, perhaps even at a summit, it would be great to have those that are involved in software engineering to participate. It's a way for us to explain what we're looking for, try to get commitments from other organizations that are sister or sibling organizations that are fifth parties to be part of the conversation. But I totally agree, we can't just rely on that. So I was trying to also speak a little bit to Julia's question about how to get people in the room if they need to be in the room.
Well, it is a good question about who should be in the room. I mean, Colin's right in that the ideal situation would be that we develop the software, and it would be great if there were going to be a lot of that. He's going to do it. Some other people are going to do it, but there are going to be people who are not part of this community who will do it as well. And so, how widely do you look? And again, one of the things that was an issue for me is that most of our colleagues in the dispute resolution community are not going to be involved in Cyberweek, are not going to be involved in iCoder. They're marginally cognizant of the technology that's out there and using some of it, but they're not really educated consumers of the technological possibilities. And that in and of itself would have an impact on the development of technology, because if there is an educated audience, if there's a marketplace, as Jeff puts it, that knows what they're looking for and knows what they will and will not accept, then that is in and of itself a pressure on the development of the products that come to that market. So I mean, there are many ways different directions to approach this from. There's a hub issue, but there are different ways of approaching that hub. There's
another question in the chat from Renato. How can technology help us to minimize the chance of the uninvited persons being in the room?
Yeah, well, this is one of the things that has happened as a result of the massive use of technology since COVID, is that there is a lot more control that you have. For example, Zoom really started out as a way for the grandparents to talk to the grandkids on the other side of the country. It was designed to be very, very easy to use. Security wasn't really an issue. And when COVID hit and people started using it, all of a sudden you increase complexity and you increase security. And so you have choices that you can make as a third party. This goes back to me educating yourself. You're preparing, I say that I want to use a particular technology. Well, I want to learn that technology. I want to understand what it does and what it won't do, so that I can take the responsibility of putting together the level of security and the level of privacy that's appropriate for the parties that I'm dealing with. And so for me, there are ways that you can do it with any technology that you're using. And if there's no way that you can control who comes into the room, maybe you ought not be using that technology for particular parties. But it's the whole process of preparation. I'm thinking about the kind of technologies I want and what functions they fulfill. I'm educating myself so that I can use them appropriately, and then applying that to a specific situation. And it doesn't matter what technology you're using, you have to do that with every one of them. We're just about out of time. Any last words from anybody else?
Well, I will pitch in just one more thing, Dan. First of all, let me just say, I love your book. I know we've already had a conversation about it. I think it's a watershed event for the field, and I think everybody in the ODR field should read it. I think it's a huge, huge contribution to the scholarship of the ODR field, building on Ethan's original concept of the fourth party. But I will say, I think that we are the nerds of the field, and it is our job to think through the appropriate use of technology and communicate it to all of our colleagues and friends who, couldn't code hello world for $1 million and a bag of chips. So that is what we are doing, is we are figuring this out. And yes, there are going to be a lot of people that don't know anything about ODR who are going to come in and they're going to build ODR systems. And you know what? They're going to build their thing and it's not going to succeed, and then they're going to move on. Over time, cream will rise and the best solutions will win in the marketplace. And that's what we need to do. Brick by brick is build the infrastructure that's going to help us deliver on the vision of the ADR field. And I think that the work we're doing is going to be seen as absolutely seminal and foundational in 20 years, because Yeah, and also the great work that you've done, Dan, in advancing the concept of the fourth party. So that's why I'm so excited about Cyberweek. Is let's do the work.
Yep, and let's get together over the week with all of the other projects, the other presentations that are going to be coming. So let me just close up by saying thank you guys for taking time out on a Monday morning to be with us, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of the week. Leah?
Thank you all. In case you haven't noticed, you can see another link to the book in the chat. And in addition, there's an updated bibliography thanks to Noam. And on the top of that is this brand new book. So hope to see all of you when Ethan shares in just a couple hours, and we'll in just 1 hour, and during the rest of the week. Thank you, Dan. Let's definitely say thanks for his great contribution to the field.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay well, be safe, everyone.